what is being called a fiery speech by the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, addressed the Munich Security Conference over the weekend. That speech was meant to reassure America's European allies, especially after the tirade against Europe by American Vice President Vance during last year's conference. And so it was indeed reconciliatory, but it still pushed U.S. President Donald Trump's America First agenda. Rubio said that America wants Europe along for the ride on a journey back to what he described as a golden age for Western civilization.
It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is a path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting.
He said that the once great Western empires began contracting after World War II. He went on to blame the rise of communism for this contraction. But his speech also focused on one more important thing.
The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come.
Now, alongside communism, Rubio harped about anti-colonial uprisings post-World War II. Remember, India got independence from the British in 1947. Sri Lanka got it the following year in 1948. In fact, almost every country in Asia and Africa was once colonized by a European nation. And all of these countries took part in anti-colonial uprisings in the aftermath of the World War II. So Rubio's idea of a golden age for Western civilization seems to be a world where the global South were several colonies. It might seem counterintuitive considering that the US was once a colony as well. But since it gained independence, Washington has taken part in colonization as well, and perhaps it still does. The US doesn't use the word colony. It calls them unincorporated territories. It has 5 of them right now. The US had more colonies in the past, like the Philippines, which won its independence in 1946. Then there was Rubio's own country of origin, Cuba. The United States occupied Cuba twice, between 1898 and 1902, and then again between 1906 and 1909. After that, Cuba was technically independent, but it went through various military dictatorships and coups, and is said to have been backed by America. This indirect control by the US only ended with the Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro. The US then proceeded to spend the next few decades trying to assassinate Castro. And now Donald Trump is trying to force Cuba to capitulate once again. He has blocked all oil shipments to the country, causing a major humanitarian crisis in the already impoverished country. Is Washington regaining control over Havana also part of Rubio's return to the golden age of Western civilization? Well, Trump has already tightened his grip on Venezuela after abducting Nicolas Maduro, and he has asked American oil companies to take control of the country's oil reserves as well. It is possible that he will do something similar in Iran as well if he goes ahead with attacking the West Asian country. American and European firms once controlled Iran's oil production before the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So Rubio's speech about Western civilization's glory days has sparked alarm in some former Western colonies as well. Africa in particular remembers all too well the exploitative policies of colonial empires. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has already issued a warning after Rubio's glorification of the colonial age. Ramaphosa urged African nations to do business on their own terms and avoid the exploitative deals of earlier days. Should other nations raise similar alarms? And should the global South be concerned with America's apparent neo-imperial rhetoric? That's the big question. And joining me live from Berlin is Dr. Volker Stanzel. He is a distinguished fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, a former ambassador as well. Ambassador Stanzel, welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you what you make of Marco Rubio's statement. There are concerns that, number one, he's perhaps justifying what the US has done in Venezuela and is trying to do in Cuba and Iran. Number two, does he realize that he's setting a dangerous precedence by promoting Western imperialism and speaking against anti-colonial uprisings?
I think his speech, first of all, was directed at Europe. It was not a speech given in the spirit of transatlantic harmony or so. He showed that he's no Vance, but he also showed that he's a representative of Trumpism. And his notions about how the world should look like is a typical example for that. I think he explained that the world should look like in the grand old days, which is something that is not the view that European countries have today. But Rubio wanted to convince the Europeans, most of all, much more than the former colonial countries, I think, colonized countries, I would say. He wouldn't care less for these countries.
And therefore, Ambassador Stanzel, in the same breath, can I also then say that a lot of what Marco Rubio said has to do with perhaps his own presidential ambitions for 2028. The primaries, of course, will start soon. He's catering to the MAGA voter base and also, sort of furthering the Trumpism that you talked about in making sure that there is Western dominance that is talked about.
Exactly. I think that is his understanding of what Trump wants to do with the world, and he wants to be a representative of that. How else can he beat Vance in the race for the succession of Donald Trump? So he criticized Europe in, let's say, polite ways, but he still criticized Europe deeply. He spoke of the so-called dogmatic vision of free trade, while he knows that Europeans know that they owe their prosperity to free trade, as do many countries in the world, former colonies as well. He spoke of the overused term of the so-called rules-based order, knowing quite well that for us the rules-based order is the United Nations, which already Trump tries to replace by his Board of Peace, with himself at the top of the future the replacement of the United Nations. So I think he wants to go even beyond what Trump has been saying so far in order to prove that he would be a good successor. Maybe he would, but not in the sense that Europeans would hope for or other countries in the world, you named a few, would imagine.
So my final question to you, Ambassador Stanzel, is how is then Europe planning to respond to Marco Rubio? Because this will increase. The kind of statements that are coming in from Secretary Rubio at the moment will increase with elections coming up and, of course, as I said, the presidential ambitions that he himself has.
That is why I think Europe will now try to make its own positions very clear. And you've already seen that in the hours after the speech of Rubio and the next day, when it became clear that the majority of the countries represented there and institutions represented there made clear that Europe must now become more independent, not independent of China or Russia or whatever, but independent of the United States. It must become a geopolitical power of its own right, not in the sense of colonialism of former days, but in the sense of representing multilateralism, the rules-based order, and what the United Nations stand for.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Dr. Volker Stanzel, let's wait and see what happens in the next few weeks and months. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your perspective.
You're welcome.